Mama, won't you carry me? I'm coming back, Jake. It's just saying it's Sister Google is saying we have a launch.
Looks
Things are
like it.
happening. Oh, am I live right now? Okay, good. All righty. Hey. Okay, welcome to 1000 Ways to be a Champion for Children, past, present, and future. The focus of this show is to increase awareness about adverse childhood experiences, to encourage adult survivors of childhood trauma to seek and get the care they need, address whatever type of beliefs that they might have had as a young person when they felt scared and unsafe and demeaned and hit and beat, whatever that is, we want you to readdress that. Then we also, for current ones, we want to stop that violence from occurring to our young folks today. And then those folks, when they have their children, that they are the people to keep them safe and healthy and have wonderful lives for these little people so that they can be wonderful parents and community contributors down the road. My guest tonight is Jake Sticka. Jake is the executive director of a group called Next Gen Men. Next Gen Men has an amazingly important message there in sharing. I'm trying to learn it, understand it so that I can share it as well. Jake, tell us about the Man Box and what Next Gen Men is doing.
Yeah, thanks so much, Alan. I really resonate with what you're trying to do here. Obviously, it's in our name, Next Gen Men, right? We're concerned with that next generation. And what we're working towards is a future where boys and men feel less pain and cause less harm. Acknowledging that, boys and men do feel pain in this patriarchal world that we currently embody. 3 out of 4 suicides are men. Men die on average 5 years earlier than women. Men are the primary perpetrators of all forms of violence. And aside from gender-based violence, men are actually the number 1 victims of all forms of violence, often at the hands of other men. 80% of opioid overdoses, incarceration, homelessness, substance abuse, all of those are male gender-based issues. So, we bring a lot of empathy for those experiences. But we also bring accountability because a lot of men transform those negative experiences and cause harm to others, especially women and girls and people who don't fit the gender norms and binary. So for us, we're really working to engage, educate, and empower boys and men around gender inequality, especially among youth in community and at workplaces, so they can be those champions for children in their communities.
Beautiful. Yeah, I think your messaging is super important. I want to be a part of contributing towards it because in researching this, I really reflected on what I know or what I thought I knew and where that came from. And man, I got to tell you, it was a scary source. Things related to sex, as an example, sex and females, and how men relate to how boys or men relate to females in a sexual context. Who did I learn that from? 12-year-old boys. Like, there was nothing in my school system. My parents did not talk about things like that. So who did I learn that from? 12-year-old boys. That's not exactly a reliable source to learn some, good life lessons. So there's a lot of things in there. It's just like, oh my goodness, I didn't even put that connection before. And one thing that I think is a huge, huge deal is that the whole man box where you are tough, you don't ask for help, you don't cry, you don't you use power to get what you want, you endure, you work through pain. That's part of your thing. I think then if that's part of the man box, you attract pain in your life that you have to work through. I think you're setting yourself up. If you're trapped in that man box, you're setting yourself up for a way harder life than it has to be, is kind of the way I'd perceive it. Would you agree, Jake?
Absolutely. I mean, there's a quote that I use in my work from Bell Hooks's book, Will to Change, on men, masculinity, and love. And she says, the first act of violence that patriarchy asks of men is not that against women, but that against themselves.
Mm.
And should they fail to psychologically and emotionally cripple themselves, they'll be met by a group of men that will do it for them.
Mm-hmm.
And so, from a very young age, we are socialized in a culture of competition and domination. that exists within this man box, right? And it's like, if my dad or media or my other male role models give me a very tight and constricting man box that I have to exist within, I then have to police your man box because it can't be bigger than mine. Because if you get that emotional and psychological freedom to explore what, masculinity or how you want to show up in the world is, then why is mine so constricting? And so we police each other throughout our lives and cause a lot of harm. And, going back to what I said earlier, like, let's be real, men treat men like shit, right? Like we always want to beat the other guy. We always want to get the girl, win the medal, whatever it is, get the job, get the promotion. We are not socialized necessarily in a very collaborative and communal and respectful fashion.
Yeah, no, I'm with you 100%. And, a lot of this, you see if this resonates with you, Jake. The whole man box, over time, the man box was even tighter and smaller in terms of what defined a man. And I think a lot of this also flowed from the whole terra nullius and doctrine of discovery, where, the countries that wanted to dominate the world, that wanted more land and more resources and more people, because if we can own people, what a great asset, right? So that those folks that did that basically came up with something that said, hey, if you go to a country and there's no people there, you can just claim that country, it's yours. And then it was a little bit of a clarification. Oh, whoa, whoa, whoa. If you go to that country and there's nobody that looks like us, then it's okay. Then they're not humans. You can do whatever you want, right? Own them, beat them, rape them, whatever. It doesn't matter because they're not humans, right? And that whole heteronormative power type thing, must dominate type thing, is just basically kind of where it still informs or shapes the man box.
Well, totally. I mean, and this is, I think, where there's organic periods of growth, and then there's destructive periods where we take what we've kind of grown into and we look at it critically and we try to tear it apart. And a lot of people are pushing back against this right now, and they're saying, what is this critical race theory, white supremacy, blah blah blah, what is this patriarchy and heteronormativity and blah blah blah, right? Like, they're really struggling because we're smarter than our ancestors, right? We've come up with language and concepts, and we're continuously learning, and we're looking at how we got to where we are, and we're like, holy crap, this hasn't served us, right? There's some people who've outsized benefits from the status quo and how we got here, but look at all these people who've been harmed from it. And the reality is, the people who have those benefits as well, look at how they're harmed by these systems too. And so I wholeheartedly agree with that. And I think our brains and neuroscience works really well when it's binary. Yes, no, right, wrong, white, black. But this is nuanced, it's shades of gray, and we're really struggling as a society to navigate these conversations, bring people along journeys of learning and unlearning.
Yeah, I think from an individual perspective, from a societal perspective, getting this message out and changing how we cooperate with each other as men, and then how also we relate in a safe and a beneficial way with the women in our life. That's super important. But from a personal level as well, I think it allows you to be really a fully functioning human, right? Like most men, if you ask them how many emotions do you have? They're going to say, I got 3, right? Most women, it's like 67 or whatever. There's a whole bunch more. So in that respect, we're kind of limiting our full functionality as a human being. We all got tear ducts, right? We all can cry. So how is it that men aren't supposed to cry? Like, that makes no sense, right? How are men not supposed to feel emotions, right? That we're living a truncated existence by being trapped in the man box.
This is why drag queens are so inspiring, right?
Yeah.
Because, physically, biologically, they're predominantly men, and they're stretching the boundaries of, gender and masculinity and femininity and all those kinds of things. And, I think there's a lot of fear of, oh, people want us all to be drag queens now. Nobody wants that. But between the man box, the tight little space that we're given, and the inspiring space that those people are occupying, there's a whole spectrum of opportunity of like stretching your legs and seeing the space that you occupy and those kinds of things, right?
Yes. Yes. Yeah, I think it's a very liberating thing when we get more folks who are feeling comfortable enough, and it's not just men and boys, right? The women also view and kind of contain people, men in their life, in the man box too, right? Like in their
Oh,
mind, oh,
absolutely.
this is how you have to behave if you want to be a man. Like pony up, go give that guy a punch in the nose, right? Because he whatever insulted you or something. And so it's both ways, right? We have to kind of realize, yeah, like there's absolutely no need for us to be in the man box. We're not cavemen. We can think, we can use our neocortex, we can communicate, we can connect, we can make a difference in each other's lives. We can have life affirming experiences with other human beings that benefit both of us, right?
Absolutely, right? That ability to be vulnerable, to share, to connect. We also see an incredible isolation epidemic now, right? And it's because men are not socialized to be vulnerable and open. Like let's say your partner and you and me and my partner, we went on a double date. You and I didn't know each other, but they were friends, and we had a great dinner. We don't live in a society where I can be like, hey, Alan, I had a great time. Do you mind if I get your number and we can hang out sometime? Right? Like we live in
Yeah,
a society that looks down on that. And
right.
so, we're constantly chopping off those moments of connection that men are trying to form with each other.
Exactly. That's a great example, Jake, because like what would be wrong with that scenario, right? There's like that makes good sense. Another human being that you connect with, we need more and more connection. Disconnection is our problem. Disconnection with ourselves and disconnection with our community. Like that's fundamentally the issue, that if we can create the connection, if we can understand and accept other people as they are without putting them in some kind of a frame or a box, man, life would get a lot easier, right? So,
Absolutely. And I mean, just thinking about, I've had the privilege in my life to have lived on 3 continents and across 4 provinces in Canada, and get to know people in all these different places and stuff, and just like the rich tapestry of people that I know, right? And so, uh, how much better our lives are when we're not putting each other in these single containers, right? Like it's great that you have your buds that you can watch the hockey game with and complain about that GM's trade, that blah 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 salary cap stuff. But can you also have conversations about like, my partner and I've been trying for a kid and we miscarried, and it's really fucking hard. Like when we're kids, we're taught that we can't look at a woman without a condom in our pocket lest they get pregnant, but then when you actually try, it's not that easy. And can you have that diversity of a conversation? And if not, then you probably need diversity of people in your life.
yes. Speaking of diversity of people, I'm like, I really need to expand my horizons. Do you have many, like, um, do you have an indigenous friend? Could you, if I said right now, hey, Jake, call up your indigenous friend, who would you call?
I don't think I do. It's been a learning journey for me as a settler here as well. We came to Canada in the early 90s. We landed in Winnipeg, and obviously Winnipeg has a large urban Indigenous population. And, my parents didn't speak English. I was, a toddler. And I'm sure the settlement agency meant well, but they said to my parents, hey, watch out for those street people, right? Welcome to Canada. Here's our anti-Indigenous stance, right? So that was some of the early stuff. And then, growing up in Calgary, I lived in the burbs, and I was, apart from Indigenous communities. And then, we would play sports on reserve. And it was always, make sure that you just when the game's over, put your track pants on and leave. Don't hang around, right? Like there was just a lot of negative connotation around it. And then I went to school in Southern Ontario, again apart from Indigenous communities. And then I lived overseas. And that was a really interesting experience. I lived in Brazil for a time, so I got like the South American colonialism with the slave import there, as well as the indigenous Brazilian lens to it. So that was really interesting. But now that I live in Vancouver, BC, I think, from my experience in Canada, is one of the most forward provinces in and around recognizing Indigenous art and culture and history and those kinds of things. And so I'm definitely learning and learning. I have friends who are settlers who work for Indigenous serving organizations, but I myself have not necessarily struck up a friendship. So there's lots of room for me to grow there.
And me too. And I'm throwing that out there because like there is, unless you extend that you want to kind of meet somebody and somebody different than you, how do you exactly here's did you and I ever have this conversation about Davis David Davis, the blues guy? Anyways,
No.
he's his dad is an official with the U.S. government, and they travel all over the world. And so, as a little boy, he goes and he's like he lives in Egypt, and then he lives in Afghanistan, and then he lives in Australia, and then like so all over the world, and he communicates with all these different kids of different languages and different religious beliefs and different colors, and everybody's cool. They all get along. Everything's all good. His dad has a posting back in the US. So they moved to the US, and the little guy here, he's like 8 or 9 years old. He joins the Boy Scouts, and he's going on a parade in the city they live in the States as a Boy Scout. And so all of a sudden he gets beamed with rocks and cans and this like, he's like, why are they mad at the Boy Scouts? Why are they throwing rocks at the Boy Scouts? And of course it wasn't that he's a Boy Scout, it's that he's Black kid, right? So the leaders of the group get around and protect them, and then have to say, here's what happened. So as a young age, he asked the question, well, how can people hate me if they've never met me? Like, this makes no sense, right? So as an adult, he goes and he approaches the leaders of Ku Klux Klans, the Imperial Wizards, and those kind of folks, and says, hey, I want to meet you. I'm a Black guy. Let's sit down and have a conversation. And so they'd have a conversation, and the white racist guy says, oh my, this person is a lot like me. What I never realized that was going to happen. So a lot of these guys would just like give up their hoods and their hats and say, I'm out. This makes no sense. I mean, I've been rallying against these evil Black beings, and holy shit, they're just like me, right?
So myself, we came to Canada as refugee immigrants, but I'm white, right? I have white privilege in that sense. And, my born name is Jakubczyka, but I go by Jake Sticka. But, that's the wrong word, but when I'm in a group and people say, oh, these damn immigrants, I lean in and I get to say, oh, tell me more, right? But when you have that diversity of experiences, and this goes back to the man box, so I'm hopefully not venturing too far off here, but like the man box is a singular experience. And when you've lived around the world, met lots of different people, experienced different cultures, read different books, all these kinds of things, and someone sells you the idea that there's one singular way to be, you can tell them to screw off because it's wrong. Right?
Exactly.
There's multiple different ways of being. So I think it's really, really important to travel, to meet people of different cultures, to, even just the idea of like how early we segregate boys and girls from each other in terms of activities. Like, let's take soccer, for example. Why do we need a 5-year-old boys soccer team and a 5-year-old girls soccer team? They're 5 years old. They all suck. Like, give them good skills and coaching until it physically matters and makes a difference, right? So yeah, I don't know. It's really interesting, and it happens from such a young age. Pink and blue and these kinds of things. Soft plug: Next Gen Men supports a podcast called Modern Manhood, and the season that we're on right now is all about how a male becomes a man, right? How we get gendered over the course of our lives from pre-birth to like age 5 to like age 10 and those kinds of things. It's such a good season.
Cool. That's awesome. And so how do people find your podcast?
If you go to nextgenmen.ca/listen.
Okay. Cool. Well, that sounds great. And who do you hope to attract as listeners to that podcast?
I think this season's really interesting for parents. Because I think we live in a world where parents for the first time are thinking critically about how they gender their children. And we've had a lot of anxious parents come to us because, try as they may at home, as soon as that child goes to a birthday party or to school or something, or watches media, like the messages are just so strong out there. And so I think that's really interesting. And then on the flip side, before we went live, you and I were talking about, knowing what we know now, how our lives would have been different. Right. And
Mhm.
so someone who is in a place where they're, reflecting on how gender may or may not have played a role in their life, it could be a really interesting journey.
Yeah, no kidding. I know that there's one thing I was thinking of when we are chatting. First of all, about how little people, especially, get trapped in the man box, or because there's social conditioning, what they're messaging and they're being told, and Gabor Mate, and he just had that big movie and the wisdom of trauma. And I just worked through all the materials from that movie or that package. It was like another 30 hours of video and stuff, right? Just finished it. But one thing that he made real clear, I thought, was about attachment and authenticity. So little Jimmy or little Jamie or whatever, whoever this little person is, has, they have some uniqueness that they're on this world to express. So they have this need, this desire to be their authentic self, but their need for attachment far outweighs that need, right? So if Janie says that she wants to be a welder when she grows up, and dad gives her, one of those, a stink eye look, well then, oh, if I want dad's love, I can't do this, right? And that is such a, you know as a parent, like, that ship has sailed. My daughter, Caitlin Nicole Friesen, PhD candidate, soon to be Dr. Caitlin Friesen, I did okay with her, but in retrospect, oh man, I screwed up a lot of things. And one of them was being way too competitive. Like, I was just off the wall competitive. And anyways, but the long and the short of it is that need for attachment outweighs the authenticity. Well, I think we're kind of shortchanging the world on the gifts that person brings.
Well, the one thing I tell those anxious parents, right, is we can't, like, we as next gen men are trying to work to transform those systems that those young people exist within, so that those systems are more welcoming, right? Whether that be sports organizations or school boards or whatever it is. But it's not going to happen overnight. So there's that natural instinct as a parent to, like, protect and shelter your child from those systems and knowing the harms that may come their way. And I think that's okay, but it should never be to actually transform that child's identity. You may have that conversation, much like that I think you said he was a jazz musician, where someone had to explain to him, listen, like, people don't like Black people here, and it's really unfortunate, whatnot. And so if you have a child that doesn't fall into the norm, maybe you have that conversation with them and you let them know that it's not okay that they experience these things. But the most important thing that parents can do is at home, give them that safe space to express that unique spark that you talked about, whatever that may be, right? If they have it at home, we all know middle school, high school, they suck. It's horrible, right? It's dog eat dog. Everyone's trying to figure out their power structure, how they fit in those kinds of things. But if they have that space at home, they have an opportunity to get to adulthood, knowing that they have that place of unconditional love to return to.
Yeah. I think that, if we, like parents, if parents weren't, and I'm a parent, so I'm relating back. I'm not casting blame on anybody else because I didn't get it right for sure. I tried hard sometimes, but didn't get it perfect. But anyways, the point is about allowing. I think Gabor Mate would say, if you could allow the authenticity to occur, if the parent was in a place that they could just allow that exploration to happen, the growth, the development, that child would have would be a very rich experience, right? As opposed to being somehow constrained. My friend David Irvin, do you know who David Irvin is? he's a author, motivational speaker, authentic leadership guru, very, very beautiful human being. Anyways, he talks about one experience he talks about when he was a little boy, his first experience going to school. He took all his dolls with him. He played with dolls at home, and he had a black girl doll, and he had a rancher doll, and like he had these dolls. And so, took them to school, got ridiculed, humiliated, came home crying, put it in a box, never looked at him again. At one time I said, David, what do you think your life would have been like if the teacher said, wow, David, that's amazing. Look at how creative you are. Hey, class, let's go and introduce us to your dolls, David. Like, that could have been such a transformative experience for that little person. Not that like David's a very successful, wonderful person, but that could have, maybe that was the path that would have been the ideal path, or the path with the most joy and the least pain, perhaps.
I have a distinct memory. I was never really big into like wrestling, like WWE and all that stuff, but I had a T-shirt that had like I think it was Raw logo or something on it, but the T-shirt itself was half pink, half purple, and tie-dyed. And I thought because it was a wrestling shirt, it was so badass and blah blah blah. And I went to school in it, and I got ridiculed, right?
Yeah.
And like grade 5, 6, I was in a lot of fist fights, and similarly, how much more did that push me into the man box rather than liberate me from the man box?
Right. Yes. Yeah, exactly. Sorry, that image of your tie-dyed shirt there. Yeah, I could see how that would have led to a little bit of ridicule when you're a little person. So, yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, like, people will say that it's drastic, but like my entry point into this work and passion for it was in my late teens and early 20s. I was struggling with this masculine script I inherited of you got to be tough, you can't show emotion, you can't ask for help, right?
Yeah.
And so, when you get challenged at 5 or 6 wearing that kind of T-shirt, you got to be tough, right? You can't be emotional, and you can't ask for help. You can't run to the teacher and be like, oh, that person made fun of my shirt, right?
Yep.
And
And
so
even if you have friends, you're not going to be comfortable expressing your emotions about this, right?
Yeah.
Like, because they're going to push you right back in the man box, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah. Jake, before we started talking, or before we went live, we were saying about how, we have a very high indigenous population in our community here, and how, the indigenous folks, our brothers and sisters, have been, treated horrendously by people look like me and you for 150 years, and took their kids away and tried to destroy their culture and kill them and give them diseases and take away all their economic supports. And you know what's amazing is that they're still here. Like, man, like you think of a culture that's transmitted orally, and for 6 generations, our government, our country tried to break that transmission of that culture, and they're still here, and they're still like, this is amazing. And I think it's a great opportunity that we can learn some of the amazing things that they had in practice before we came and messed with it, things that were working really good. They had an amazing way for bringing up little people, right? There was rites of passage. You knew where you were in the community. You had huge supports, right? Bruce Perry talks about the relational deficit that young people have, right? And especially, even in your case, you were a popular kid in sports and all that kind of thing. But even in that case, you didn't have people that you could talk to about a lot of things, right? And having somebody that you could express that as a buffer, as a support, as a guide to keep you from pain, that kind of thing would have been valuable, right? So I'm looking for how can just caring members in our community backfill those relationship deficits that young people have, so that they have support, that they know that somebody cares about their welfare, that they maybe want to be able to allow them different experiences, right? To engage them with different things that they can try to explore. What is their path? What is their journey? What is the things that are going to bring them joy and allow them to contribute most fully to our society, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, we're like, 2021, with a more and more secular society, right? A lot of the old cultural institutions that also enforced a lot of the horrible things that happened to Indigenous people
Definitely.
um, is eroding, right? And so we need to figure out what those new community cultural institutions are for us so that we can support people that aren't necessarily, our kin or our blood or those kinds of things. Because, I'm not surprised that Indigenous culture and communities are still here. They've overcome a lot, but like, those cultures were built for resilience, right? And ours are colonial, white supremacist, patriarchal. They're fragile, right? And they're eroding in front of us. And so I think with a lot of the challenges ahead of us, freaking the climate emergency, right? Like we can't apply the old ways of doing things to that. So I think we have a lot to learn.
I think we do too. I know one thing that I learned. This is bizarre how it works, but I was talking to some folks in Australia who are with the Rotary Action Group for Family Safety. So I'm talking to these folks in Australia. They tell me about a program in Canada called Honoring Indigenous People. So I had never heard of it. So I talked to John from Honoring Indigenous People. He says, "Oh yeah, here's basically our strategy. There's like what is this now? About 760 Rotary clubs across Canada. There's 650 Indigenous communities. We want the Rotary clubs and the Indigenous communities to have a relationship, and the
Mm.
Rotary clubs to be able to understand the Indigenous folks, their experience, and how they might contribute. I mean, Rotary does amazing work in you know in Cuba, in Guatemala, in Mexico, in Africa, amazing things. And I'm very proud of that. Like we do things like that because I'm a Rotarian. But there's stuff that we can do right here in our community. And you and I, the changes we make in our community, we're going to be able to see that change in 2 months and 6 months and 10 years and 50 years, right?
Yeah.
That maybe we guided somebody to a better path and they had a better life before it, and they had stronger relationships and they had more joy, right? I mean, so how important is that, right?
Absolutely. I mean, that was the tension for me this last Canada Day. We heard lots of calls for cancel Canada Day and those kinds of things. But Canada Day as a refugee immigrant means a lot to me, right? Because this country was a beacon of hope out in the world. And like you said, whether it be developmental work abroad or those kinds of things, Canada is a good brand abroad. But the painful part of that is the cognitive dissonance and the disconnect with, what we are to our own communities here, especially the Indigenous communities. So, I think that's a good tension for us to reflect on in Canada Days in the future, and make sure that we're working just as hard, not to be that outward beacon of hope, but to be that beacon of hope to people all across Canada, wherever they may be.
Agreed. I know that when I was asking you about if you had an Indigenous friend, I'm asking you because I have failed in connecting with an Indigenous friend so far. Like it just, I've talked to a few, and I thought we're things were clicking, but then they don't, they don't want to continue that, right? And so, and should I be surprised? No, like for 150 years, guys like me have been moving our mouths and telling lies and doing very, very harmful things. So the fact that they like an Indigenous person doesn't automatically trust a white man, I think that's fair. That's like that's your survival instinct kicking in, right? So
Well, it's the same thing with, men and women, right? Worst thing that men feel fear from women is rejection. The worst thing women feel fear from men is death, right? And
right,
so, when you're like, I'm a good guy, like what's wrong, blah, 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 right? They've heard that line, right?
right,
And so I think that what we need to do when we're trying to connect across these chasms, right, of distrust and those kinds of things, um, and I'm not saying this is what you're doing, but we got to be conscious of like not having that tokenism and like just genuinely show up expecting in nothing in return. Do
right.
that thing with nothing in return, right? Like there's so many men who do gender equity work for their, daughters and wives, but when you look at that, you're like, well, you're expecting a return for them, but like, I'm sure you've met women in your life before. You were born of a woman, so why would you not do that work just cuz, right?
Yeah.
And the same thing for us when we're thinking about truth and reconciliation. We don't need an Indigenous friend necessarily. We know it's the right thing to do. And what is our role to play within that? Is it in how we vote? Is it in how we educate ourselves? And then when we hear problematic things, educate others so that, Indigenous people don't have to bear that burden and whatnot. And I think when we can practice that authentically and show up, maybe we don't build trust in our lifetime, but maybe your daughter benefits from that, right?
Right.
Maybe the next generation of Rotarians benefits from that. But it's just it's slow and it's hard work, and it just means showing up and doing the right thing and expecting nothing in return.
On I was thinking about this. They talk about the 60 scoop. You've heard the term before, 60 scoop, right? I didn't realize this, but my parents, my mother was, I guess, part of the 60 scoop because we were a white family, but we fostered Indigenous kids, right? Indigenous and Métis kids. And so at the time, I'm a little, what do I know about it? Just, geez, I got these other little kids in my space, shared my toys. What the hell? So, that's for me, I didn't really understand what it was, but for Indigenous people, it was another effort to take Indigenous kids and put them in a white family so they grow up with a white family and wouldn't forget their language and all that kind of stuff, right? So on Canada Day, I went to the parade in Raymond. My friend Jim Bennett is a Rotarian, and he's really well connected in the community. He's a police officer with Blood Tribe Police and has very, very strong relationships with Indigenous folks. And so I went down and watched the parade, which is amazing. Raymond has the biggest parade in Alberta, I think. It's like incredible. And the back at Jim's house, the Indigenous singers and dancers that were there. So then we met with them and chatted with them and that kind of thing. So it was quite a bit of fun. But one thing that I really enjoyed, Jim, his little guy, geez, is it Max? I think it's Max. Max, I was, talking to him and hanging on to him and singing him songs and such. And then there's this little Indigenous girl who was trying to entertain him as well. And she had this little, like a little finger puppet type thing of Old MacDonald Had a Farm. So I said, you get behind the couch. There's your stage. You perform. We'll stay on this side and watch you, right? So she went and she did her little performance. She sang the whole song, right? And then we applauded and yay, that was awesome. But it's just like, if you think back, I don't know, not that long ago, 50 years ago, that there could have been a guy with a gun walk up and knock on the door and take this kid and they're gone and their parents never see him again.
Last
And
residential school closed in the mid-90s.
Yeah. So how would that not even break your will to live? I don't care about, eating or taking my drugs. I want to die now because my kid's gone. Right. So,
Yeah.
so I can, that was horrendous. Okay. So Jake, got on a little roll there. What I wanted to get from you is how, knowing that we want just caring adults to augment the professionals that are at work, you and the other professional folks that are doing this work, how do we augment what you do and kind of fill these relationship backstops for little people in our world? How can we do that?
Yeah, a couple things. I think especially as men, it's incredibly important. There's, on the one hand, my natural desire is to say an unfortunate stigma, but I also similarly understand why this stigma exists when we look at the Boy Scouts, the Roman Catholic Church, etc. There's a stigma of older men engaging with younger children, right?
Mm-hmm.
So a lot of guys just straight up avoid it, but that's not going to help break that stigma. What we need is a lot more men who genuinely and authentically show up for children and don't harm them, right?
Right.
So I think that there's a lot of work to be done. As much as we're advancing, women in science, technology, engineering, math, leadership, politics, et cetera, we need more men in early childhood education, caregiving roles, service line roles, those kinds of things, right? And to do that, we obviously need, capacity, and us other guys not look down on the guys that do that and say shitty things about them. And, there's a wholesale culture change. But I'm saying that because that's important work we need to be conscious of, right? It doesn't mean that we're going to change it immediately, but it's stuff that we need to do. So that's one piece. Show up for the kids in your community. Oftentimes that's through sports coaching, which is a natural and easy way where men don't face a lot of stigma in that. So
Right.
if you are a sports coach, know that you're not just training athletes, you're training young people to become the next generation. And it's part of your role is to help guide them the best way possible there. And for a lot of young men, their sports coach early on is their first non-father male role model, right? So that's such an important and genuine and authentic role for guys to embody. And I think they just think about X's and O's and how to do the sport and don't think about the weight of it otherwise. So I want them to think about that. But the other thing that I'll plug, and Alan, I'm so stoked that, when I offered this to you, you jumped in with both feet. Next Gen Men can't be everywhere and do all the things. So we built a course called Raising Next Gen Men. And we would love for people to take that course to just better understand what is going on for young men, right? It's not necessarily a course that will give you XYZ tools in your tool belt, but what do those tools necessarily mean if you don't know the trigonometry of the build and the things that's going on, right? And so this is a self-led online course for
Really
people
good
who.
course, Jake. I don't know if I told you, excellent course. I learned tons from it. It was well put together, followed along, had great inspiring examples. Very nicely done. Carry on.
Awesome. Thank you. Appreciate the live testimonial. But yeah, anyone who wants to know how gender and masculinity impacts the social and emotional development of young men, parents, teachers, coaches, youth workers, I think it's a tremendous resource.
Yeah, I agree. Very well done. I was going to mention about when you're talking about sports and that role in terms of when I was a young lad, I played hockey a little bit. I wasn't particularly athletic, but I played hockey. And in playing hockey, I had a coach. His name was Maurice Lanoux. Everybody called him Mo Lanoux because I guess when he was a kid, that wasn't a problem. He called Mo Lanoux. But anyways, subsequently, it would have been a challenge. Anyways, I don't know, I was probably like about 45 and I thought of him and I sent him a letter. And just, Mr. Lanoux, don't know if you remember me. You taught me, you were my coach for playing hockey. Obviously, I didn't make it to the NHL, but I just wanted to thank you, for your, showing me how we work together as a team, showing what happens when we lose, showing what happens when we win. How do we support each other, and how to deal with the shitty things and how to bounce. Anyways, those kind of life lessons, right? And so didn't think much of it. That was fine. And then about 10 years after I said that letter, Mo Lanou's son called me and said, "Hey, I'm Brent. I was on the same hockey team with you back in the day. Dad's passed away, and in his cabinet of special letters and mementos was your letter to him, thanking him for being a
Oh,
coach." So
that's
it's
so
kind of,
nice.
I appreciate what he did for me. And when I expressed my appreciation back to him, that was very meaningful for him. So it was a beautiful exchange that we were both so glad, we're both so appreciative of each other in terms of that relationship. So
No, that's a beautiful story.
yeah, I thought so. I liked it. I loved it when Brett called me back. His son called me back. That was amazing. So, um, yes. Okay, Jake. What else do we have to talk about? Oh, did I tell you I'm a big brother now? Did I tell you that?
No, you didn't.
Oh
That's
yeah.
exciting though.
So this was during COVID, when COVID first started. I had all kinds of time in my hands, so I was signing up for courses and doing all kinds of things. So I said I'd be a big brother. 3 months, virtual only. When this thing blows over, blah blah blah. I got to get back to. So, anyways, that's what I did. And the first bit was awkward because we're connected online, and like I've never met this kid before. He doesn't know me. And so I would get my coveralls on and go in my Quonset, and he would get his coveralls on and go in his garage. And we just have a video link of him dicking with something and me working on something. And every once in a while we'd have a little conversation. Oh, what are you working on there? Oh, that kind of a thing. Anyways, now I understand the value I can have in this young man's life. And I see so much of me when I was his age, and I know things that I can help him with that nobody was able to help me with when I was his age. So I am so gratified for the experience to make a difference in this guy's life. But it gets better. It gets better. In doing this, I've been a little bit reflective on my tendencies, and there's some things I'm not a very good role model. I've got some issues, but I don't really want to change those issues because I'm pretty happy with myself. I like myself. So what instead I'm doing is I'm recruiting other adults to come in who have the technical skill to help him learn something better than I would be able to teach him. So as an example, I have a truck that needs a new transmission. Well, I'm going to have him help the transmission tech. I'm going to be there as well, so that he sees, how does the transmission get replaced in a truck? What's the process? How does this work? Right? What is this job like? That kind of a thing. And then we need a tank buried over here. So I'm going to get my neighbor to lend me or rent me his backhoe. And I'm going to get my brother, who's operated backhoes for 50 years. I can make a hole with a backhoe, but it ain't pretty. And he knows how to do it right. So I'm going to recruit him to help this kid learn how to run the backhoe correctly. And in so doing, I'm bringing I'm engaging some other people in this kid's life, that he gets a little taste of what they're like, and just another adult who says, hey, I'm willing to spend some time with you to teach you something. So I'm really excited about that.
And isn't this funny where, oftentimes, and this goes back to what I was saying about guys not necessarily getting involved in these kinds of things, you go into it and you think, I'm going to do some good, I'm going to give back. Inevitably, we get so much more from it.
Agreed. It's just so gratifying to say, okay, wow, and especially, I know, first of all, I kept on coming back to about that this isn't what I want to do, or this isn't for me. And then it's just like, hey, like, this is not for you, buddy. Like, this is, you're here to be of value to this little person. This is nothing in it for you except the satisfaction you're going to get because he's going to be appreciative of that you're helping him, right? So
the best thing we can do as adults too, when we're engaging with youth, is flex that curiosity muscle, right?
Yeah.
They see the world so differently than we do, so we got to try and get down on their level. Not down, they're not that small or anything anymore, but
yes.
and try to understand, right? Because if we impose our view, our lived experience, our history, whatever it is, we're perpetuating the man box in another form, right? And if it's not a gender man box, it's here's my ideological philosophy of the world. But we also have to look at the world around us and say, we've grown over our lives. Nothing is stagnant. So why not look ahead to the future?
Yes. Yeah. No, I agree. I know that's back to my daughter when she finished high school and she had to register for University of Lethbridge is where she went and got her bachelor's. She was away in Europe. So, and there was a deadline and I had to go register her for it. So I registered her. And then when I registered, I put her in all of the business management, those kind of programs, right? Because I'm thinking she's so personable and she's so good with people, and which she really is. But she was like upset when she come back because she had no interest. It was all science. She was hard science, and she's really smart. So like that. So anyway, she changed everything I did to do what she wanted to do, which, good on her. That's what she should have done. But at the time I was insulted. What, you don't want to be part of the business world? I'm part of the business world. Come on. So anyways, it was quite interesting. So.
Yeah. But again, that just reinforces that, safe space at home to give them that space to roam.
Exactly. All of the opportunities that you can reasonably afford in terms of time and resources, so that they have the most opportunities to explore their authenticity.
Yeah,
I think that would be perfect. if I could go back and do parenting again, that's what I try and do this time.
Yeah, absolutely. And not just trust that, education only comes at school.
Right.
Education is also what comes on evenings and weekends when you have them, right?
Yes. So are you and your bride pregnant?
No, no, we're not there yet, but
Okay.
hopefully someday. Yeah.
Okay. Okay. Well, I hope I hope as well. Being a parent is hard work. You're never going to get it perfect, but it is very redeeming and it is very satisfying to, that you had whatever positive influences you did with a human being in their journey. So
Yeah. Everyone says it's the single hardest thing they've ever done, and it's the single most rewarding thing they've ever done.
yes, exactly, exactly. Well, Jake, I think we're good. That unless you got anything else you want to add. You talked about the podcast. You talked about the course, right?
Yeah, everything's at nextgenmen.ca. That's the website. You can check out all the great stuff that we're doing there. On the youth side of things, there's just so many different things we can offer. We've got an online space for 12 to 14-year-old boys. We've got, decks of cards called Cards for Masculinity to help prompt conversations that you may not have otherwise. We've got community groups where we're hosting online community discussions around various topics. In July this month, we're going to be talking about masculinity and self-improvement, right? Like COVID's coming to an end here and everyone's talking about, being beach ready, and, they're preying on our weaknesses as individuals trying to, better ourselves. So there'll be community conversation. We've got a book club. There's just so much stuff that we're doing. So nextgenmen.ca is the home for that. And if people are on socials, whether that be Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, it's at nextgenmen.
So Next Gen Men doing an awesome job about exploding the man box, helping you understand the man box, helping you step out of the man box, and with those that you love, how give them an opportunity, take them at face value and let them step away from there and enjoy a better life in the process and more fully contribute in a way that really feeds their soul. That is what they were meant to do instead of being trapped or constrained. And it feels for the women, ladies as well, right? If your daughter wants to run a backhoe and she loves running a backhoe, hallelujah, say good on you and get her the skills she needs to do that, right? So, yeah,
Absolutely. We've done a great job of telling our daughters they can do anything boys can do. We've done a shit job of telling our sons they can do anything girls can do. And until we have that, we're not going to have gender equity.
very true. Very well said. Yes, exactly. Why shouldn't there be a whole bunch more male nurses, right? Why shouldn't there be a whole bunch more male childcare workers, right? Like, I could hold on to babies and rock them for hours. Like, I'm really good at it. So I think I hold the patent on it, but my wife assures me, no, she taught me, so it's not me. So anyways, Jake, I appreciate your time. I think you're doing amazing work, and it's so nice to see you and have this conversation with you. And don't be a stranger.
My pleasure, Alan. Take good care. Thanks for having me on.
All right, see ya.